Jacob had never been the jealous type. His relationship with Emily had always been built on trust, respect, and what he believed was an unshakable bond. Married for 8 years with 2 kids, their lives had settled into a rhythm, perhaps too predictable, but comforting in its own way. But over the past couple of months, Jacob had noticed subtle changes in Emily's behavior. Little things. At first, she was glued to her phone more often, her laughter at late-night texts a sound that began to feel foreign. She'd started dressing up more often, even on ordinary days, with an attention to detail that wasn't typical for her laid-back personality. When he'd jokingly commented on her extra effort one morning, she'd waved it off. "Sometimes it's nice to feel put together," she'd said, smiling. "You know, for myself." Jacob wanted to believe her, but the changes didn't stop there. She'd started staying out later after work, often with vague excuses about needing me time or meeting coworkers for drinks. Last-minute errands became a new habit, always conveniently scheduled when Jacob was putting the kids to bed. Still, he pushed down his unease. He didn't want to be the kind of husband who accused his wife of something without proof. Yet the doubts had taken root in his mind, growing stronger with every unexplained absence, every tight-lipped smile, and every half-hearted excuse. It all came to a head on a Thursday night. Emily had gone out again, leaving Jacob to tuck the kids into bed. As he read his youngest a bedtime story, he couldn't focus on the words. His mind was elsewhere, replaying all the moments over the past weeks that didn't add up. By the time Emily got home, it was past 10 p.m. Jacob was sitting on the couch, nursing a beer and staring blankly at the TV. She walked in, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels. "Sorry I'm late. We lost track of time." Jacob glanced at her, his stomach twisting. "Who's we?" Emily froze for a split second before recovering. "Just some people from work," she said casually. "You know, the usual crowd." Jacob nodded slowly, taking a sip of his beer. He didn't push further, but his suspicions were eating away at him. Something was off, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, Jacob made a decision. He'd been tiptoeing around his doubts for too long. If he wanted answers, he needed to ask her directly. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Jacob found Emily in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while absent-mindedly sipping a glass of wine. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but firm. She looked up, startled by his tone. "What's wrong?" Jacob took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "Are you cheating on me?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Emily's eyes widened, and for a moment, she said nothing. Jacob watched as a series of emotions flickered across her face: shock, confusion, fear. "Jacob," she began, her voice trembling, "why would you even ask me that?" "You've been acting differently," Jacob said, keeping his tone calm but resolute. "The late nights, the extra effort in how you look, the phone glued to your hand. I've noticed it all, Emily. And I can't ignore it anymore." Emily's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles turning white. "You're overthinking this," she said, her voice defensive. "I've just been busy, Jacob. Work has been crazy, and I've been trying to make time for myself. That's all." "Then tell me the truth," Jacob said, his gaze unwavering. "Because if there's nothing going on, why does it feel like you're hiding something?" For a moment, Emily looked like she was about to argue. But then her shoulders slumped, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jacob's stomach dropped. "Just tell me," he said softly. Emily set her glass down, her hands trembling. "Yes," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I am." Jacob felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He stared at Emily, his mind struggling to process her words. "How long?" he asked, his voice hollow. Emily wiped at her eyes, avoiding his gaze. "A few months," she said. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to. Who is it? Jacob pressed, his anger beginning to simmer beneath the surface. It's someone from work, Emily admitted. His name is Ryan. Jacob clenched his fists, his breath coming faster. Ryan? The same Ryan you've mentioned at least a dozen times over dinner. The one who's just a friend. Emily winced at the accusation but didn't deny it. Why, Emily? Jacob asked, his voice breaking. Why would you do this? Tears streamed down Emily's face as she struggled to find the words. I don't know, she said finally. I was feeling stuck. Like we were just going through the motions. Ryan was there, and he listened to me in a way that made me feel seen. Jacob's anger flared. Seen. I see you every single day, Emily. I've been here for you through everything, through the stress, the kids, the hard times. And this is how you repay me. I didn't mean to hurt you, Emily sobbed. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. Jacob stood, pacing the kitchen as he tried to contain his emotions. So, what now? He asked, his voice cold. Are you leaving me for him? Or was I just supposed to keep playing the fool while you lived this double life? Emily shook her head frantically. No. I don't want to leave, Jacob. I want to fix this. I know I've made a horrible mistake, but I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose that. Jacob stopped pacing, turning to face her. If you wanted to fix this, Emily, you would have stopped before it got this far. You would have come to me before you decided to betray everything we built together. Emily broke down, covering her face with her hands. Jacob stood in silence, his emotions a chaotic mess of anger, pain, and confusion. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain, their lives would never be the same again. Jacob sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel as though it was the only thing tethering him to reality. After Emily's confession, he had needed to get out of the house. The walls of their home, once a place of warmth and love, now felt suffocating. Every corner seemed to echo with her words, I didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened. It just happened, Jacob muttered bitterly to himself, shaking his head. That wasn't an excuse, and it didn't explain anything. Affairs didn't just happen. They required choices, decisions to betray trust, to prioritize someone else over the vows they had made. The thought of Ryan made Jacob's stomach churn. He pictured the man, smug and self-assured, laughing at Jacob's expense. Was Ryan in love with Emily? Did he plan to take her away, or was he just another selfish opportunist looking for excitement? Jacob clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to figure out how to protect himself and his family. When Jacob returned home, the house was eerily quiet. Emily was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as he walked in, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. Where did you go? She asked softly. Does it matter? Jacob replied, his voice colder than he intended. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. We're not done talking. Emily nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. I know. Jacob sat down across from her, fixing her with a steady gaze. I need the whole truth, Emily. No more half-answers, no more excuses. If there's any chance of moving forward, you have to tell me everything. Do you understand? Yes, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Start from the beginning, Jacob said. How did this happen? Emily took a shaky breath before speaking. It started at the end of summer, she said. You remember how busy things were with the kids, your work, my job. I felt like we were barely connecting anymore. I tried to tell myself it was just a rough patch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Jacob's jaw tightened. Something was missing. So instead of talking to me about it, you went to Ryan? I didn't plan for it to happen, Emily said quickly. We'd worked on a few projects together at work, and we got along well. It was innocent at first, just conversations about work, nothing personal. But then, she trailed off, wringing her hands. Then what? Jacob pressed. Emily looked down, tears streaming down her face. Then it got personal, she admitted. We started talking about our lives outside of work, our families, our struggles. He told me he felt stuck in his marriage, like he was just going through the motions. And I guess I related to that. Jacob's stomach twisted. And that's all it took. A little commiserating, and suddenly he's more important than me. Than our family. It wasn't like that, Emily said, her voice breaking. I wasn't looking for anything, Jacob. I didn't want this to happen. But one night, after a work event, we stayed late to talk. And he kissed me. Jacob felt like he'd been punched in the gut. And you just let him? Emily shook her head frantically. No. At first, I pulled away. I told him it was wrong, that we couldn't do this. But I don't know. A part of me didn't want to stop it. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, and it scared me. Jacob stared at her, his heart pounding. And then what? Did it stop there? Emily hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer Jacob needed. How far did it go, Emily? He demanded, his voice shaking. Emily broke down, covering her face with her hands. We slept together, she whispered. Twice. But I ended it, Jacob. I told him we couldn't keep doing this, that I couldn't betray you anymore. Jacob felt the room spin around him. Twice. She'd chosen this man over and over again, even after knowing it was wrong. When? Jacob asked, his voice hollow. What? When did it end? Emily wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. A month ago. I told him it was over, and I haven't seen him since. Jacob's mind raced. A month ago. That meant she'd been lying to him for weeks, pretending everything was fine while carrying the weight of this secret. Why didn't you tell me then? Jacob asked, his anger barely contained. Why wait until I had to ask you directly? I was scared, Emily admitted. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if I could just move on and focus on us, maybe we could get back to the way things were. Jacob laughed bitterly. The way things were? You mean when I trusted you? When I thought I knew who you were? Emily flinched at his words, tears streaming down her face. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said. But I love you, Jacob. I love our family. And I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Jacob stood, his emotions a chaotic storm of anger, pain, and betrayal. I don't even know what making this right looks like, he said. Right now, I don't even know if I can look at you. That night, Jacob slept in the guest room. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying Emily's confession over and over. He wanted to believe that she was truly sorry, that she was committed to repairing their marriage. But the image of her with Ryan, the man she had chosen, even if only for a moment, was burned into his mind. The next morning, as he stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, Jacob made a decision. If Emily wanted to fix this, she would have to prove it. And if Ryan thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was sorely mistaken. Jacob woke up in the guest room, his body stiff from a restless night. His mind felt just as heavy as his limbs, clouded with the memories of Emily's confession and the impossible question of what to do next. Downstairs, the quiet sounds of Emily moving around the kitchen reminded him that life, as messy as it was now, hadn't stopped. The kids would wake up soon, oblivious to the tension in their home. Jacob knew he had to keep it together for their sake, at least for now. When he finally made his way downstairs, Emily looked up from the sink. Her eyes were puffy, and her face was pale, but she offered a tentative smile. "I made coffee," she said softly. Jacob ignored the mug she placed on the counter and grabbed his keys. "I need to clear my head," he said flatly. "Jacob, please," Emily said, her voice breaking. "We need to talk about this." "Not now," he replied, already heading for the door. Jacob drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything. How could Emily claim to love him while betraying him in such a profound way? And Ryan, how could someone he'd never met have so much power over his life? Eventually, Jacob found himself parked outside Emily's workplace. It wasn't intentional, but he realized he wanted answers from Ryan, directly. If this man thought he could swoop in, destroy Jacob's family, and walk away unscathed, he had another thing coming. Jacob sat in his car, staring at the building, until he saw him. Ryan. He looked exactly like Jacob had imagined, polished, confident, the kind of man who probably thought he was doing Emily a favor by seeing her. Jacob's blood boiled as he stepped out of the car. He didn't have a plan, just the overwhelming need to confront him. "Ryan," Jacob called out as he approached. Ryan turned, his expression shifting from confusion to unease. "Can I help you?" "I'm Jacob," he said coldly. "Emily's husband." Ryan's face froze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "I think we need to talk," Jacob continued. "Now." Ryan led him to a nearby cafe, the awkward silence between them stretching the entire way. They sat at a small table in the corner, far from the other patrons. Jacob studied Ryan, looking for cracks in his polished exterior, but Ryan seemed composed, too composed. "I'm guessing Emily told you," Ryan said finally, his tone careful. "She did," Jacob replied, his voice sharp. "And now you're going to tell me your side of the story." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "Look, I know this is a mess. And I'm sorry for my part in it." "Your part?" Jacob snapped. "You mean sleeping with my wife?" "Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty big part, don't you think?" Ryan flinched but didn't argue. "I'm not trying to defend what happened," he said. "It was a mistake, something that got out of control. I never wanted to hurt you or your family." Jacob leaned forward, his fists clenched. "If you didn't want to hurt us, you wouldn't have gone near her in the first place." "You're right," Ryan admitted. "But it wasn't planned. Emily and I, we connected. We were both struggling, and it just happened." "Don't," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't give me that, it just happened, crap. You made a choice, both of you. So, tell me, what do you want from her? Are you in love with her? Or was this just some cheap fling to pass the time?" Ryan hesitated, his expression unreadable. "I don't want anything from her," he said finally. "And no, I'm not in love with her. What we had, it wasn't real. It was a distraction. That's all." Jacob felt a strange mix of anger and relief at Ryan's words. If it wasn't love, maybe Emily wasn't as far gone as he'd feared. But the fact that she'd risked everything for a meaningless affair cut even deeper. "So, what now?" Jacob asked. "Are you just going to walk away and pretend none of this happened?" Ryan nodded. "I already told Emily it was over. I meant it. I don't want to be the guy who ruins someone else's life." Jacob stared at him, searching for any sign of deception. Ryan seemed sincere, but Jacob's trust had been shattered too many times to take anyone's word at face value. "You're damn right it's over," Jacob said finally. "But if you so much as look at her again, I'll make sure your life is just as ruined as mine is right now." Ryan nodded, his expression somber. "You won't hear from me again," he said. Jacob stood, his chest tight with rage and frustration. "Good," he said. "Because if I do, you'll regret it." When Jacob returned home, Emily was sitting on the couch, wringing her hands. She looked up as he walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Where did you go?" she asked softly. "To see him," Jacob said, his voice flat. Emily's face paled. "What did he say?" "That it's over," Jacob replied. "And it better stay that way." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It will," she said. "I swear." Jacob sat down across from her, his expression hard. "I talked to Ryan, but this isn't about him anymore. It's about us. And if you want to fix this, you're going to have to do the work. No more lies. No more excuses." "I'll do whatever it takes," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I just want to make things right." Jacob nodded slowly, his anger giving way to exhaustion. "Then we'll start with the truth," he said. "Everything. Every detail, every question I ask, you answer. No more hiding." Emily nodded, her gaze filled with guilt and determination. "Okay," she said. "I'll tell you everything." Jacob leaned back, crossing his arms. "Good," he said. "Because if I catch you in one more lie, this marriage is over." The silence in the living room was oppressive. Emily sat across from Jacob, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. Jacob's face was like stone, his eyes locked onto hers, waiting for her to speak. "I'll tell you everything," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "You should have done that from the start," Jacob replied coldly. "But here we are. Start talking." Emily wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "It started about 6 months ago," she began. "I wasn't looking for anything, Jacob. I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray you. But I was feeling lost." "Lost," Jacob repeated, his tone laced with bitterness. Emily nodded. "It felt like we were on autopilot, like we were just going through the motions. You were working late a lot, and when you were home, it felt like we barely talked anymore. And Ryan, he noticed me. He paid attention to things I didn't even realize I needed attention for." Jacob clenched his fists. "So, because I didn't shower you with attention, you thought it was okay to seek it somewhere else? Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to provide for this family?" "I know," Emily said, tears spilling down her face. "And I wasn't trying to justify what I did. I'm just trying to explain how it happened." "Keep going," Jacob said curtly. Emily hesitated, then continued. "It started with work. We were paired on a project together, and we started talking, about work, life, everything. He was funny, easy to talk to, and before I realized it, we were texting outside of work. At first, it was innocent. But then it became something else." "What does something else mean?" Jacob asked, his voice tight. Emily's hands twisted the tissue in her lap. "It got flirty," she admitted. "And I should have stopped it there. But I didn't. And then, one night after a work event, he kissed me." Jacob leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "And you kissed him back?" Emily nodded, her eyes full of shame. "How long before you slept with him?" Jacob demanded. Emily flinched at his directness but didn't avoid the question. "A few weeks," she said softly. "It only happened twice, Jacob. And after the second time, I realized how wrong it was. I told him we couldn't keep doing this, that I was done. And I ended it. Why should I believe you?" Jacob asked, his voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months, Emily. How do I know this isn't just another lie to make yourself look better?" "I can't make you believe me," Emily said, her voice trembling. "But I swear, Jacob, it's the truth. I haven't seen him since I ended it. The only contact we've had was when he tried to reach out, and I ignored him." Jacob leaned back, his anger simmering. "What about the kids?" he asked. "Did you even think about what this would do to them?" Emily broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I thought about them every day," she said. I hated myself for what I was doing. But I didn't know how to stop. And when I finally ended it, I was too scared to tell you because I didn't want to lose them, or you. Jacob shook his head, his emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. Well, you've done a hell of a job protecting them, haven't you? That night, Jacob sat alone in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. He'd heard everything Emily had to say, but the doubts remained. She claimed it was over, but was it? Could he trust her not to backslide into old patterns? And then there was Ryan. As much as Jacob hated the man, he couldn't deny that Emily had made her own choices. Ryan might have been the catalyst, but it was Emily who had crossed the line. For the first time since her confession, Jacob wondered if he could ever forgive her. The following morning, Emily approached him cautiously. She looked like she hadn't slept, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "I've made an appointment for counseling," she said quietly. "For us. I know it's not much, but I want to show you that I'm serious about fixing this." Jacob nodded stiffly. "Good. But don't think one counseling session will erase what you've done." "I don't expect it to," Emily said. "I just want to start somewhere." The first counseling session was tense, to say the least. Jacob was guarded, his responses clipped, while Emily opened up about her feelings of loneliness and inadequacy. "It doesn't excuse what I did," Emily said, her voice trembling. "But I felt like I wasn't enough anymore. Like I'd become invisible." "You weren't invisible," Jacob snapped. "You just weren't looking at me. I've been here the whole time, Emily. I've been working my ass off to give you and the kids everything you need. And this is how you repay me?" "I know," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "And I hate myself for it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I love you, Jacob. I love you, and I want to fix this." The counselor interjected, urging them to focus on rebuilding communication and trust. But Jacob struggled to see how trust could be rebuilt when it felt like his entire world had been shattered. Over the next few weeks, Jacob and Emily continued with counseling. Emily cut all ties with Ryan, deleting his number and blocking him on every platform. She gave Jacob full access to her phone and email, a gesture meant to reassure him, though it felt like too little, too late. Despite her efforts, Jacob remained guarded. Every time he looked at Emily, he saw flashes of her betrayal, the secret texts, the nights spent with someone else. Forgiveness felt impossible, and yet, part of him still wanted to try. For the kids, if nothing else. One afternoon, while the kids were at school, Emily handed Jacob a letter. "What's this?" he asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "It's everything I couldn't say out loud," she said. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever fix, but I needed you to know how sorry I am." Jacob hesitated, then opened the letter. Emily's words were raw and heartfelt, filled with regret and a desperate plea for a second chance. As he read, Jacob felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in weeks, hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. The letter weighed heavily in Jacob's hands long after he had finished reading it. Emily had poured her heart into it, acknowledging her faults, apologizing for the pain she had caused, and laying bare the insecurities that had led her down such a destructive path. But while her words stirred something in him, they weren't enough to erase what had happened. That night, Jacob sat across from Emily at the dinner table after the kids were asleep. She seemed tense, watching him with cautious eyes as though bracing for whatever decision he might deliver. "I read the letter," he said, breaking the silence. Emily nodded nervously. And I'm still angry," Jacob admitted. "I'm hurt. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Emily's face fell, but she nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight, Jacob. I just want the chance to earn it back." Jacob leaned back in his chair, staring at her. "Do you even know how much damage you've done?" "Yes," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Jacob. I promise. Jacob exhaled, his emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that they could rebuild their marriage for the sake of their family. But another part of him was still consumed by bitterness and doubt. I don't know if love is enough anymore, Jacob said finally. Emily's tears spilled over, but she held his gaze. Maybe it isn't, she said. But I'm not giving up on us. Even if it takes years, Jacob, I'll keep fighting for this, for you. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Jacob and Emily continued their counseling sessions, working through the tangled mess of their relationship. Some days felt like progress, when they could have honest conversations without anger or tears, but other days were like reliving the betrayal all over again. Jacob found himself swinging between moments of hope and despair. He saw flashes of the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had been his partner for years, but those moments were always shadowed by the memory of her betrayal. Emily, for her part, threw herself into rebuilding Jacob's trust. She volunteered to be transparent about her whereabouts, stopped going out after work entirely, and prioritized spending time with Jacob and the kids. She even quit her job, a drastic move that Jacob hadn't asked for but one she insisted on. I can't work there anymore, Emily said when she told him. Not after everything that's happened. I need a fresh start, and I think we do too. Jacob didn't argue. He wasn't sure if her quitting would fix anything, but it was a step, a sign that she was serious about making things right. Despite the steps they were taking, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something unresolved. His confrontation with Ryan had been brief and unsatisfying, and part of him wondered if the man had truly let go of Emily, or if he was still lurking in the background, waiting for another opportunity. One afternoon, Jacob decided to reach out to Ryan's wife, Amanda. He had debated it for weeks, unsure if involving her further would stir up more trouble, but his lingering doubts pushed him to act. Amanda answered his call cautiously, her tone wary. Jacob? Is everything okay? I just wanted to check in, Jacob said. Has Ryan mentioned anything about Emily? There was a pause, and Jacob could hear Amanda sigh on the other end. No, she said finally. After you confronted him, he told me everything. I made it clear that if he ever contacted her again, our marriage was over. He hasn't brought her up since. Jacob felt a small wave of relief but couldn't ignore the tension in Amanda's voice. How are things with you two? He asked. Amanda hesitated. We're trying, she said. It's not easy. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him, but, for now, we're working on it. Jacob nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Same here, he said. That night, Jacob shared the conversation with Emily. So he's out of the picture, Jacob said, watching her carefully. For now, at least. Emily nodded, her expression serious. Good. I don't ever want to see him again, Jacob. I mean that. Jacob studied her, searching for any hint of doubt or hesitation, but she seemed genuine. I hope you mean it, he said. Because if he ever does reach out and you don't tell me immediately, this is over. No second chances. I understand, Emily said, her voice steady. As the weeks turned into months, Jacob began to notice small changes in himself. The bitterness and anger that had consumed him after Emily's confession began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first step towards something that resembled healing. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Emily reached for his hand. He hesitated for a moment before letting her take it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said softly. But I'm grateful that you're giving me the chance to try. Jacob looked at her, seeing the guilt and determination etched into her face. For the first time in a long time, he saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who, despite her mistakes, was still fighting to be by his side. I'm not ready to forgive you, Jacob said honestly. But I'm willing to try. Emily nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. That's all I need, she said. As they sat in the quiet of their home, holding hands, Jacob felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months: hope. It had been 6 months since Jacob asked Emily the question that shattered their world. 6 months of counseling sessions, tearful conversations, and cautious steps toward rebuilding their life together. Things weren't perfect, Jacob still had moments of doubt, and Emily was still weighed down by guilt, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of forward motion. Jacob wasn't sure he would ever completely forgive Emily. Some days, the memories of her betrayal still hit him like a tidal wave, threatening to drag him back into anger and resentment. But those moments were becoming less frequent. The good days, the days where he could see the effort Emily was making, the days where their laughter felt real again, were starting to outnumber the bad ones. The hardest part, Jacob realized, wasn't the anger or the pain. It was the fear. The fear that no matter how much work they put into rebuilding their marriage, it would never be the same. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the kids play in the yard, Emily broke the silence. "I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice hesitant. Jacob looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" "I want us to renew our vows," Emily said. Jacob blinked, caught off guard. "Renew our vows?" Emily nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know it won't erase what I did. But I want to recommit myself to you, Jacob. To our marriage, to our family. I want to show you that I'm all in, that I'm never going to take what we have for granted again." Jacob stared at her, his emotions a mix of surprise, hesitation, and something he couldn't quite name. "I don't know, Emily," he said finally. "That feels big. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet." Emily nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I understand," she said softly. "But whenever you are ready, if you're ever ready, I want you to know that I'll be waiting." The idea of renewing their vows lingered in Jacob's mind over the next few weeks. At first, he dismissed it, thinking it was too soon, too much. But the more he thought about it, the more he began to see it as an opportunity, not to erase the past, but to mark a new beginning. One evening, Jacob surprised Emily by sitting her down at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About renewing our vows." Emily's eyes widened slightly, and she nodded. "Okay. I'm not ready to do something big," Jacob said. "No ceremonies, no guests. But I think I'm ready to recommit to you. Privately. Just the two of us." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded quickly. "That's all I want," she said. They chose a quiet afternoon to exchange their renewed vows, standing together in the small clearing behind their house where the kids often played. Jacob hadn't written anything elaborate, just a few honest words about his commitment to trying again, to rebuilding what they'd lost. Emily's vows were raw and heartfelt, filled with apologies and promises, but also hope. "I can't change what I've done," she said, her voice trembling. "But I can promise you this, I'll never stop working to earn your trust back. And I'll never take this family for granted again." As they stood there, holding hands and looking into each other's eyes, Jacob felt something shift inside him. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was something close. Over the months that followed, their marriage continued to heal. It wasn't a straight path, there were still moments of doubt, still nights when Jacob lay awake wondering if he'd made the right choice. But those moments grew fewer and farther between as they rebuilt their connection, brick by brick. Emily started a new job, far removed from the company where she had met Ryan. She threw herself into their family, making a point to spend more time with Jacob and the kids, and ensuring that her actions matched her words. Jacob, for his part, worked on opening up more, on being present in ways he hadn't been before the affair. He realized that while Emily's betrayal had been her choice, their marriage had cracks long before Ryan entered the picture. Fixing those cracks would require effort from both of them. One evening, as they sat together on the couch after putting the kids to bed, Emily rested her head on Jacob's shoulder. "Do you think we'll ever be fully okay again?" she asked softly. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then replied, "I don't know. But I think we're getting there." Emily nodded, her fingers lacing with his. "I'll keep trying, no matter how long it takes." Jacob looked down at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe her. "We both will," he said. As they sat together in the quiet of their home, Jacob felt a small but growing sense of peace. Their marriage would never be the same as it had been, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something even stronger.